Hello Army, and welcome back to the channel. If you are here for the first time, I am genuinely so glad you found this video, and I promise you that by the time we reach the end of today's discussion, you are going to walk away with a completely new level of appreciation for something that I think even the most dedicated members of this community sometimes take for granted. And if you are a longtime viewer, then you already know that on this channel we do not just celebrate Jungkook in the way that fandoms celebrate their favorites. We examine. We analyze. We ask the harder questions and we go looking for the answers that exist beyond the surface of what everyone already knows. And today, the question we are asking is one that I have been wanting to address in depth for a very long time. The question is this: why does every single world-class music producer and artist who has ever worked closely with Jungkook come out of that experience saying essentially the same thing? Why does someone as credentialed and experienced as Diplo reach for the same words that Charlie Puth used years earlier? Why does Chris Martin's reaction in a documentary mirror the reaction that Tyler Spry gave in a Billboard interview? Why, across different countries, different genres, different eras of Jungkook's career, different creative contexts, different languages and cultures and musical traditions, does the professional consensus on Jungkook's voice and musicianship remain so strikingly, almost uncannily consistent? That is what we are going to explore today. And I think the answer is going to surprise you even if you already believe, as most of us do, that Jungkook is one of the greatest vocal talents of his generation. So please, hit that like button, make sure you are subscribed, and let us dive into this. Let us start at the very beginning of this pattern, because understanding where it originated helps us appreciate just how long it has been building and how many independent data points now support it. The earliest instance in Jungkook's career of a major outside collaborator publicly expressing this level of specific, detailed vocal admiration came with the My Universe collaboration with Coldplay. Now, for those of you who know the full story of how that collaboration came together, you already know that it was not a simple remote recording situation. Chris Martin, the frontman and creative driving force behind one of the biggest and most critically respected rock bands in history, made the deliberate decision to fly to South Korea in person to record the song with BTS rather than handling everything remotely. That decision alone tells you something important about how seriously Martin was approaching the collaboration and how genuinely invested he was in the creative process. This was not a transactional arrangement. This was an artist of immense stature choosing to physically go to the people he was working with because he wanted the experience to be real and present and sincere. And what happened in that studio in South Korea, captured on film in the documentary that Big Hit Music subsequently released, is one of the most important pieces of evidence in the case we are building today. When Jungkook stepped up to record his part of My Universe, he did so in a state of genuine nerves. He admitted later that recording in front of Chris Martin made him feel an unusual level of pressure, this, from a person who had been performing on massive stages in front of hundreds of thousands of people for years, who had trained relentlessly since the age of 15, who was already one of the most celebrated vocalists in K-pop. Even Jungkook felt the weight of singing in front of Chris Martin. And yet, when he delivered his vocal, what happened was not what nervous people typically produce. What happened was that Chris Martin was so immediately and viscerally impressed that he did not wait for a break in the session to express it. He turned to the Big Hit staff in the room right then and there and said, in those exact words, "Please tell JK he is so impressive." Not impressive for a K-pop idol. Not impressive for someone his age. Not impressive considering how nervous he seemed. Just impressive. Full stop. From Chris Martin. A person who has spent decades working with the finest vocalists and musicians on the planet. A person who co-wrote and produced albums that are studied in music programs around the world. That kind of person turned to his translator in real time to make sure Jungkook knew immediately that what he had just delivered was something worthy of recognition at the highest level. What makes that moment so significant in the context of today's conversation is not just the praise itself but the spontaneity of it. Chris Martin did not rehearse that response. He did not think about how it would be received by fans or how it would play in the documentary. He reacted to something in the moment because the moment demanded it. That is the most honest kind of professional praise that exists, the kind that comes out before the person even has a chance to think about whether they should be saying it. And that pattern of spontaneous, unrehearsed, immediate professional admiration is something that comes up again and again in the story of Jungkook's interactions with the world's most accomplished musicians. Let us move forward in time to the collaboration with Charlie Puth on Left and Right in 2022, because this is where the pattern becomes even clearer and even more specifically documented. Charlie Puth is, by any objective measure, one of the most technically gifted musicians working in popular music today. He is not just a successful pop artist. He is a person with perfect pitch, a rare auditory gift that allows him to identify and reproduce musical notes with extraordinary precision without any external reference. He has a music degree, he produces and engineers much of his own music, he understands vocal technique at a technical level that goes far beyond what most performers in the mainstream music world possess. When Charlie Puth talks about someone's voice, he is doing so with a depth of musical knowledge that gives his words specific and considerable weight. And what Charlie Puth said about Jungkook after their collaboration on Left and Right is nothing short of extraordinary when you understand the source. Puth described Jungkook's vocals as miraculously perfect. He did not say good. He did not say impressive. He said miraculously perfect. He elaborated by explaining that he did not have to alter Jungkook's vocals in any way during the production process, that they were simply correct, clean, and ready as delivered. But what truly stands out in Puth's comments is the specific technical observation he made about Jungkook possessing perfect pitch. Here is someone who himself has perfect pitch, who understands exactly what that means and how rare it is, looking at Jungkook and recognizing the same gift. Puth noted that Jungkook never fumbled during the recording process, that he could hear a note and reproduce it immediately and accurately, that the collaborative process was smooth and efficient in a way that Puth attributed specifically to Jungkook's exceptional musical ear. Think about what it means for someone with perfect pitch to recognize and acknowledge the same quality in another person. It is not a compliment being dispensed from a position of general admiration. It is a peer recognition. It is one musician with a rare and specific gift looking at another musician and saying, "You have this too, and you use it extraordinarily well." Puth also shared something that reveals another layer of Jungkook's musical nature that often gets overshadowed by the more visible aspects of his artistry. He mentioned that it was actually Jungkook who sent him the initial vocals that sparked the entire collaboration, that Jungkook had recorded and sent his part first, and that Puth listened to what he received and immediately knew he wanted to turn it into a duet. That means Jungkook was not simply responding to someone else's creative direction in that collaboration. He was initiating. He was the one whose vocal reached across the world, landed in Charlie Puth's ears, and inspired the song to become what it ultimately became. That is not the story of a performer executing someone else's vision. That is the story of a musician whose output has an intrinsic creative energy that moves other artists to action. And Left and Right went on to reach 100 million views on YouTube in under 3 weeks and accumulated tens of millions of streams on Spotify in record time, not because of fandom coordination alone but because of the genuine quality of the music and the vocal performances at its core. Now let us bring this forward to the most recent and perhaps most publicly impactful instance of this pattern, which came in early 2026 when Diplo gave an interview to TMZ about his work on BTS's comeback album Ararang. Diplo is a name that needs very little introduction in the context of global music production. He is a Grammy-winning producer and the man behind Major Lazer, and his production credits include work with Beyoncé, Justin Bieber, Madonna, Dua Lipa, Bad Bunny, and virtually every other major name in contemporary pop music. He is someone who has spent his entire career working with the most commercially successful and creatively ambitious artists in the world. His professional frame of reference is essentially the entire landscape of global popular music over the past 2 decades. And when Diplo was asked in that TMZ interview about working on Ararang and specifically about working with Jungkook, his response was remarkably direct and remarkably familiar in its language. He said, and I want to be precise here because the specificity matters, that Jungkook does not need autotune and that he has a perfect voice. 2 things. No autotune. Perfect voice. Those are not vague platitudes. Those are specific technical assessments delivered in the plain, unadorned language of a professional who knows exactly what he is talking about and has no particular incentive to exaggerate. Diplo has worked with artists who have used autotune extensively and artists who have not. He knows the difference. He knows what it sounds like when a voice is technically flawless enough to need no correction. And when he listened to Jungkook in the studio, what he heard was a voice that required nothing. That reached the note, held it, moved through it, and came off the other side exactly as it needed to. Jeff Benjamin, the Billboard columnist who covered the story, wrote explicitly on social media that Diplo called Jungkook a perfect singer who does not need autotune at all, and the response across music media platforms was immediate and widespread. MSN, People, World Music Awards, Pop Bass, Popcore, Spin or Bin, all of them highlighted Diplo's comments, because when a producer of that stature says something that's specific about a vocalist, the music industry pays attention. But the pattern does not stop with just these three names. Tyler Spry, the composer of Swim, the lead single from Ararang, gave his own interview to Billboard around the time of the album's release in which he was asked about his first impression of working with BTS as collaborators. And his answer, unprompted and in his own words, circled back to exactly the same place that Diplo and Charlie Puth and Chris Martin had all arrived at independently. Spry described Jungkook as a really good composer and an amazing singer, and when he elaborated on what he meant by amazing, he specifically pointed to the fact that Jungkook perfectly digests all the notes without autotune. There it is again. The same observation. The same technical specificity. The same conclusion reached by a completely different producer working in a completely different sonic context on a completely different project. Spry is known primarily for his work with Bad Bunny. His production on DTMF, the lead track from Bad Bunny's Grammy-winning album, established him as one of the most forward-thinking producers working in Latin pop and global music right now. His frame of reference is entirely different from Diplo's. His musical world is different. His production style is different. His background and his experience are different. And yet when he sat across from Jungkook in his studio and watched him work, the thing that struck him and the thing he chose to highlight when asked about the experience was the same thing that struck everyone else. No autotune. Perfect notes. Every time. And then there is Jenna Andrews, the composer behind BTS's global mega-hit Butter, who when asked about Jungkook offered an assessment that is slightly different in its language but identical in its direction. She described him simply as really amazing, said his voice was crazy, and called it outstanding. Again, the unforced, immediate, direct nature of the praise is significant. These are not people who have been asked to say nice things about Jungkook. These are professionals responding to what they experienced in the studio and expressing it in the most natural language available to them. And that language, across multiple people, multiple projects, multiple years and contexts and creative environments, keeps resolving to the same fundamental point: Jungkook's voice is something rare, something genuine, something that registers as exceptional even to the people who have heard thousands of exceptional voices in their professional careers. Now I want to pause here and address something directly, because I think it is important to engage with the question of what this pattern actually tells us rather than simply accumulating more and more examples of it. The most obvious interpretation is simply that Jungkook is a technically gifted vocalist, which of course is true and well established. But I think the significance of the producer consensus pattern goes deeper than just confirming something we already knew. What it actually tells us is something about the nature and the completeness of Jungkook's vocal gift, about the fact that it holds up not just in polished performances that have been rehearsed 1,000 times and executed in front of adoring audiences, but in the cold, honest, unforgiving environment of a professional recording studio. A studio where the microphone picks up everything. Where the producer is sitting right there with headphones on listening to every breath, every pitch inflection, every tiny fluctuation in tone and resonance. Where there is no crowd energy, no performance context, no emotional momentum carrying the moment forward. Just a singer and a microphone and a set of notes that either land or they do not. And in that environment, which strips away everything except pure technical and artistic ability, Jungkook has consistently impressed some of the most experienced and discerning ears in the global music industry. That is not a coincidence. That is not the result of coordinated promotional activity. That is the product of something real. There is also something worth exploring here about perfect pitch specifically, because it is the quality that multiple producers have independently noted, and it is one that has significant implications for understanding why Jungkook's studio work is so consistently praised. Perfect pitch, or absolute pitch, is the ability to identify or reproduce a musical pitch without any external reference point. It is estimated to be present in roughly 1 in 10,000 people in Western populations, though slightly more common among those who have undergone early and intensive musical training. Jungkook began his BTS training at the age of 15, which while not as early as some perfect pitch researchers would consider ideal, was still during a developmental window where intensive musical immersion can reinforce and develop existing auditory gifts. What perfect pitch means in practical recording terms is that a singer with this ability will instinctively reach for the correct note and produce it accurately without needing the kind of pitch correction that autotune provides. It means that when a producer gives a pitch reference or describes what a note should sound like, the singer can internalize that information and execute it immediately and accurately. It means that the often time-consuming and technically demanding process of finding a note and settling into it that characterizes even many highly accomplished vocalists is simply not a significant obstacle. The note is there, it is accessible, and it comes out right. Every producer who has worked with Jungkook has encountered this reality in the studio, and every one of them has found it remarkable enough to speak about publicly. But I want to go beyond the technical, because I think limiting this conversation to pitch accuracy and the absence of autotune usage undersells what the producer consensus is really responding to. When Charlie Puth says miraculously perfect, he is not just describing accurate pitch reproduction. He is describing something in the quality, the texture, the emotional intelligence of the way Jungkook delivers a vocal that transcends technique. When Chris Martin says JK is so impressive, he is not complimenting a well-calibrated machine. He is responding to a human voice that communicates something. Something genuine, something felt, something that connects. Jungkook's voice does not just hit the right notes. It does something with those notes that reaches the listener on an emotional level that is very difficult to manufacture and essentially impossible to fake. Diplo said perfect voice, not perfect technique. The distinction matters. A perfect technique is something you can train into existence with enough time and discipline. A perfect voice is something rarer, a combination of natural gift, developed craft, emotional expressiveness, and sonic identity that comes together in a way that is both technically flawless and humanly resonant. That is what every producer who has sat across from Jungkook in a studio has encountered. And that is why they all, independently, reach for the same language to describe it. Let us also take a moment to think about what this means for Jungkook's future, because the implications of this producer consensus are not just historical. They are prospective. Jungkook is currently understood to be preparing a second solo album, and the signals surrounding that preparation, the custom in-ear monitors, the creative groundwork laid through his songwriting contributions to Erarang, the reports of musical activity including reportedly spending time with Charlie Puth again in mid-2025 all point toward an artist who is actively deepening and expanding the creative relationships that have already yielded extraordinary results. If Charlie Puth and Jungkook are in each other's orbit again after the success of Left and Right, if Diplo has just described working on Erarang as potentially the biggest moment of his career, if Tyler Sprice's experience of recording Swim with Jungkook was the kind of experience that producers describe publicly as remarkable, what does the next body of work look like when Jungkook brings all of those relationships and all of that accumulated professional credibility to bear on a solo project that he himself has described as unlike anything that has come before? The answer to that question is something I genuinely think the music industry is not yet fully prepared for. But the producers who have already worked with him? I suspect they have an idea. And I suspect that is exactly why, every single time one of them is asked about their experience, they reach for words like perfect. There is one final dimension to this story that I want to make sure we address before we close out today's video, and it is perhaps the most personally meaningful aspect for those of us who have been on this journey with Jungkook for a long time. There is something profoundly moving about the fact that this pattern of professional recognition exists, because Jungkook has not always been the most naturally confident person when it comes to his own abilities. He has spoken about insecurity. He has spoken about the pressure he feels to be worthy of the trust that his bandmates and his fans place in him. He felt nervous recording in front of Chris Martin. He has described being moved and overwhelmed by positive responses to his work in ways that suggest someone who, despite the extraordinary level of his accomplishments, has never fully normalized the idea of being celebrated. And yet here is the world's most respected music professionals, one after another, sitting in studios with him and coming out the other side with the same verdict. Here is Diplo, who produces for Beyoncé, saying no autotune, perfect voice. Here is Charlie Puth, who has perfect pitch himself, saying miraculously perfect and noting absolute pitch. Here is Chris Martin, who flew to Korea just to be in the room, asking his translator to immediately convey how impressive he found the performance. Here is Tyler Spry, fresh off a Grammy-winning album, describing Jungkook as amazing and noting the same technical precision every other producer has noted. The universe, through these voices, has been consistently and clearly trying to tell Jungkook something. And what it has been saying, in multiple languages and across many years and from many different corners of the professional music world, is the same thing every single time. You are extraordinary. What you do is rare. What you bring to a studio is something that the people who know this world best recognize and respond to with genuine, unrehearsed, immediate admiration. That is not a talking point. That is a fact. And it is one that ARMY, who has known it all along, can now hear confirmed by the people whose professional lives have brought them as close to greatness as it is possible to get. Thank you so much for watching this video, ARMY. If this gave you new appreciation for Jungkook or connected some dots in a way that felt meaningful, please give it a thumbs up. It genuinely makes an enormous difference for this channel and it helps this content reach more people who deserve to know this story. If you are not subscribed yet, please hit that button right now because we have so much more content coming about Jungkook, about BTS, about the Ararang era, and about everything that is building toward what I genuinely believe is going to be one of the most exciting periods in the history of this group and this individual artist. Drop a comment below and tell me which of these producer reactions hit you the hardest. Was it Diplo? Charlie Puth? Chris Martin? Something else entirely? I read every single comment and I love hearing from this community. Take care of yourselves. I will see you in the next one.